The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kate Trace with the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs. We're going to get started in just a moment with the webinar to present the NOFA for the ERA2 Housing Stability Services Funds. With me today is Meredith Malsby. She's going to be doing the bulk of the presentation. Also with me is Alex Kostelnik and Frank Sarno from our Housing Stability Services team here at TDHCA. Alex and Frank will be on hand for questions. So I'm going to just go through a couple of housekeeping reminders as we wait for some other attendees to start joining on. We've got a pretty big bulk of folks in the attendee list so far now, but I know some folks might need a moment to get signed in and get their systems working. So all materials that we're going to present today, everything is posted on the TDHCA website for Housing Stability Services. The NOFA is there. The link to the application portal, which Meredith will go through a little bit later, is there. And we have also added the slides that we're going through today. Those slides are available on the website directly under the registration link that you found on there. And I think we might be able to get the slides put on here. Someone just asked, will the training be recorded? Yes, it will. You'll see that's the fourth bullet here on the housekeeping slide. So at the end of the training, we will have plenty of time for questions. Hopefully we can answer them all. If you want, in your GoToWebinar portal, there's a questions box. Thank you to the first person that asked a question, so you know it's working. So send your questions in there. If you can, if it's a question like specifically about a section in the NOFA or a slide that we've gone over, please give us a little detail so we can go back and refer to that question, either pulling up a piece of the NOFA or going back to a specific slide. So yes, send your questions through. So we'll answer questions as we go or at the end. This training is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the webpage. Like I said, the slides are there, the recording will be posted, and then we're also going to post a list of all questions that we have received and the answers. Some of the questions might be summarized if it's asked slightly different ways. But yes, all of the material will be publicly available on that webpage. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to refer to what has been posted. Send them to hss@tdhca.state.tx.us. And with that, I think I will hand it over to Meredith. Oh, I'm so sorry, Meredith. Before I jump in, I did just want to mention, I have this in my notes, that the intended audience for this webinar today is for organizations or folks that are applying specifically to administer the ERA2 Housing Stability Services Program as an eligible organization. We had received some questions from landlords and some questions from tenants, but this webinar and this funding source is not for direct rent payments. It's not for landlords. So if you've joined this webinar for that purpose, I'm sorry, this is not the funding source. We can follow up with you with additional resources after this webinar on where you can seek rent assistance. So now with that, I'm going to hand it over to Meredith. Thank you all for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Meredith. Here is our agenda for the presentation. We're going to go do an overview of the NOFA. We'll discuss the timeline and the scoring, go into a little bit of detail on the submission and review and approval, and then go into the actual what the NOFA will pay for, which is the eligible activities and the performance measures, and then a Q&A. We should go through it. It shouldn't take too long. There'll be plenty of time for questions. So for the overview, this NOFA is for $84 million in federal funding from the Treasury, the Department of Treasury, through the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program is through, the Rental Assistance Program is going through the state, and that, the Texas Rent Relief Program is what most people are familiar with, and that is what the state was doing. That has currently closed. These are different funds. 10% of the ERA2 funds can be used for housing stability services. That's what this NOFA specifically is for. And we'll be going into what housing stability services means, but it does not include rental or utility payments. Keep in mind while you're thinking about what you want to, your application, that the minimum amount that has to be requested under this NOFA is $100,000 and the maximum will be $12 million. So as Kate already kind of mentioned, this is not for individuals. This is specifically for eligible organizations, and those include cities, counties, councils of government, public housing authorities, private nonprofit organizations, and other eligible organizations per Treasury regulations. If you are wondering if your organization is eligible, go ahead and send a question through the webinar. The applicant must be in good standing with the department, the Texas Secretary of State, Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts, and U.S. Department of Treasury. Here's a timeline for the NOFA. So bookmark this slide, write it down, make sure you have it available so you know exactly all the time. So obviously this was published on the 12th. I'm sorry for dogs. Today is the webinar. We'll go into the early application information a little bit later, but keep in mind it is December 16th and it will be due by 5 p.m. Central Time. The application in full will be due on January 7th, 2022 by 5 p.m. Central Time. We'll announce the awards in somewhere around March 2022. The contract period will be April 1st, 2022 to March 31st, 2024. There may be some room for extensions. Will depend on performance of, if somebody's underperforming, then we could potentially deobligate funds and move those funds to higher performing subrecipients. And then in that case, there might be a contract extension. So here's the information for the early application. All applicants are encouraged through the award of points to submit an early application notification email to the department on December 16th, 2021 by 5 p.m. And there's our email, hss@tdhca.state.tx.us. The email must include a minimum of your name of your entity that's applying and the amount of funds that you're going to be requesting. And this little asterisk that your amount can change from your early application email to your final application. So as we will go into a little bit later, the early application is a part of the scoring. You will be awarded more points for completing this. These are the applicant threshold criteria. This is the minimum that you must turn in for your final application. And that includes the application form, which you must fill out on the Smart Sheets portal. And to make sure you fill out, we'll go over this a little bit later too, but make sure you fill everything out. The program description, the proposed budget, the statement of capacity, and estimates of households served. So again, this is the minimum. There's a checklist in the NOFA for additional materials and information that can also be submitted. The application must be sent via the Smartsheet link. We will not accept applications via email. And the link is all on the website, as well as the budget template and any other forms that are required. So now we're going to talk about the scoring criteria. It's into 3 parts. And we'll go through each section. The highest possible score is 200, and that will be reserved for people who have done the ERA1 funds, which we'll talk about just a little bit. And the minimum score you must receive is 65 points. So here is the first section, and part of the first section. So keep in mind, while we're kind of going through this, that you will get awarded more points the more details you give us. So as you can see in the first scoring mechanism box, you get 25 points for telling us many more details, more descriptions, and more details about what your plan is. And that score goes down the less detail you provide. So that is going to be the way it works through this part one. So I am not necessarily going to go through every scoring mechanism, but be sure you read exactly what will give you those extra points. So your program, so your descriptions and budget and all your narratives include everything that can get you top points. So the program description, a description of the program, including services provided, estimated households served, and process from intake to outcomes. Next, there will be a proposed budget for administrative and programmatic expenses. There is a budget template provided on the website underneath the NOFA. A statement of capacity, statement of the applicant's capacity to perform the proposed activities. The rest of part one, the estimated number of households to be served by each activity, and the TDHCA grant experience with similar programs. Applicant who has experience with TDHCA's ESG, Home, TRBA, and Colonia SCH programs. Okay, part two. Also, as you can see in the scoring mechanism, has that same ranked scoring. So the more you offer us, the more details and descriptions you offer, the higher pointage you will get. So these are so the first one, service delivery. The applicant provides a description of services that will be delivered. If the applicant provides shelter or temporary or permanent housing in addition to services, does the applicant require those sheltered housed to participate in services and/or case management? Does the applicant describe methods such as marketing, street outreach, or referrals from other providers to find eligible clients for activities proposed? Does the applicant describe how income eligibility will be determined and documented? So I know we're just reading through these, but I wanted to make sure they were up here on this presentation so you can kind of, you can be aware of them, make sure you are aware of the scoring and the details that will be required to get a high score. So be sure, if you have specific questions, go ahead and send them in. I'm not going to go into great detail. This is an overview of the scoring. This is the rest of part two, the client's needs assessment. Applicant proposes a process to determine the housing stability needs of a household, whether through case managers, housing navigators, or other methods that is used as part of a larger housing service framework to provide housing stability services. Special populations. Applicant plans to reach and assist persons with disabilities, persons with VAWA protections, and/or veterans. All right, the part three is an additional criteria. As I mentioned already, early application notification. You will get 10 extra points for sending in the early application email that is due by December 16th at 5 p.m. Central Time. And if you are an ERA1 HSS participant, has the applicant participated in the ERA1 HSS program, remained in good standing, and met at least 75% of their expenditure benchmarks by the January 7, 2022 application deadline. And that's an extra 40 points. So down here, these are specifically for those subrecipients who are already receiving ERA1 funds that have already been expended and contracts out. So those funds are not available. They're already being spent. This NOFA is specifically for ERA2. Those people who are already receiving those funds, good standing includes met at least 75% of their ERA1 expenditure benchmarks for first quarter by January 7, 2022, which is the due date. The September and October reports have been sent in a timely fashion. The November reports have been submitted by the December 15th deadline, and they have been responsive to questions or corrections on reporting. All right, so that's the end of the scoring. So if you have specific questions about a definition or something within the scoring, please send it in. This slide is specifically for those ERA1 subrecipients. We wanted to go over one thing in particular for them to keep in mind as they are creating their application, which is the overlapping of spending. So these contracts will in fact overlap in between April 2022 and August 2022. So all the ERA1 funds that you are receiving must be expended before you are allowed to use ERA2. TDHCA will not let you spend ERA2 until ERA1 is complete. And the reason for that is ERA1 funds will expire. So we must get those spent by a certain date. So as you're creating your application, keep in mind that you will potentially, depending on how you're able to spend ERA1 funds, you will have some overlapping there. And so keep in mind how you plan to budget your ERA2 funds with a couple months where you are still spending ERA1. And if you are getting ERA1 funds, as we're discussing, you are able to enter into a contract for ERA2 funds. You just won't be able to spend those, the NOFA funds right away. All right, so this is some information on the actual submission of your application. As you can see in very bold letters, it is due January 7th, 2022 by 5 p.m. Central. And all the information, the NOFA, the documents can be found on our website. And that also has the link, as I put in a previous slide, to the submission portal. That's where your application must be submitted. We will not accept it via email. So any applications received after 5 p.m. Austin local / Central time on January 7th will be disqualified and will not be reviewed. The department will post to its ERA2 HSS webpage a log of all applications received within approximately 10 days of the application deadline. So these are just some tidbits to keep in mind. Again, applications are due by January 7th, 2022, 5 p.m. Central time. All materials must be submitted through the portal, link on the website. With submitting, be sure to fill out all the form fields that are on the application. Do not leave anything blank. Ensure that you upload all the required documents. Check, double check, triple check. Name your documents with your organization's name so it's considerably easier for everyone, mostly for us when we're trying to get through them all after you've applied. And once you've submitted, you will receive a confirmation email, and please save those for your records. So after your application has been sent in, we will start reviewing it, obviously. No changes will be accepted to any part of an application after the submission to the department. On top of that, while reviewing applicants, we may request some additional information, and that will likely be a clarification, a correction, or information to resolve any inconsistencies. And administrative deficiencies. If we email you for requests for information, you must reply it must be resolved by the 5th calendar day following the date of the deficiency note. 2 points will be deducted for each additional day the deficiency remains unresolved. On the 7th calendar day following the date of the deficiency notice, then the application shall be terminated. So if we are trying to get a hold of you for some more information, be sure to get back with us immediately. Okay, so this is more into what these funds can actually be used for. We're not going to go fully into it because all that information for the 3rd bullet point is provided in the program guidelines document that is on the HSS website, and it provides a detailed list of eligible activities and activities that are not allowed. Funds can be used to support eligible households below 80% AMI who are experiencing housing instability during or due directly or indirectly to the coronavirus pandemic in maintaining or obtaining stable housing. All HSS assistance funds must be for services that are part of a program to maintain or obtain housing. All HSS services must be tied to specific households. So again, as I just said, look at the program guideline as you're creating your application. Make sure what you're planning on doing fits within what these funds are actually able to pay for. So for the performance measures, these are once you've applied and we've gone through your application, you've scored high enough and you've moved through into the contract. The contract will be issued for a term of 24 months, subject to opportunity for extension per what I discussed earlier about if you happen to be obligated with more funds due to high performance. The contract benchmarks will be reflected in the contract for the subrecipient that require expenditures as following. At the 6th month, you have to have 25% of ERA2 funds expended, 12 months, 50%, 18 months, 75%, and at the 24 months, of course, the whole 100%. A note for ERA1, I know that you were able to choose your benchmarks in your contract. These you will not be able to choose. These are the benchmarks in this slide. These are the ones you must follow. And again, I put these in here specifically so as you're trying to figure out your budget, you're figuring out what you can pay for, be sure to keep these in mind so you're applying for something that is attainable and not that you end up not being able to completely live up to. Okay, so these are some pre-submitted questions we received that we're gonna go through, and then you'll have time, and then we have plenty of time for you to send in your own questions. From TDHC's perspective, would it be preferable to expend ERA1 funds before commencing ERA2 services? So yes, as we already discussed a couple times, you must expend all ERA1 funds before ERA2 can be used, because ERA1 will expire. Regarding the 40 points for expending ERA1 funds, are these points awarded on all or nothing basis? Yes, these are all or nothing. If the Texas Rent Relief Program continues with a status of not accepting applications for rental assistance, is there any possibility this may be considered an allowable HSS cost in the future? No, rent and utility assistance are not allowed under this program. Some local municipalities or organizations may still have some rent relief funds, so these funds could be used to assist your clients in applying for those programs. But these funds cannot be used for rent or utility assistance. May funding be used towards a down payment on a home? No, these funds cannot be used for down payment or assisting with applications for down payment assistance. TDHCA has existing down payment assistance programs. You can refer clients there. On top of that, TDHCA is planning to administer $840 million in mortgage assistance through the Homeowner Assistance Fund as part of the American Rescue Act. The program is currently under development and is awaiting approval from Treasury. So keep a lookout on the TDHCA website for that program to open up. May funding be used for capital expense? No, these funds cannot be used for any capital projects. Regarding the category of eligible service assistance with correcting eviction, debt, or other inaccurate data from a household's credit report, what are examples of assistance that would be allowable? So under this one, it would be hiring a credit correction agency or assisting your client with fixing a credit report. A subrecipient cannot use these funds to help pay off debt. Is there a cap on the number of months the landlord incentives may be provided? Yes, the cap is currently at 1 month at lease signing, and the incentive must be within the signed lease. and that signed lease must be at least 6 months. The HSS team has asked TDHCA for more flexibility from Treasury on this in order to align it more with the security deposit rules, but we have not heard back yet. So if that changes, we'll let you know. Regarding short-term payments to hotels, please provide a definition of short-term. The short-term is the time it takes to get a client into a household that is transitional or permanent. Subrecipients must be actively working with that household to locate or move them into transitional or permanent housing. So there's not a specific time. So it's the time it just takes to get people into a more permanent home. And that is the last pre-submitted question I have. So Kate or Alex, do you want to start working on other questions?
Sure. Thank you so much, Meredith, for going through that. We've had a lot of questions come in. I think we're just gonna, go from the top of the list and keep going down. If there's something that's like really specific to a current ERA1 housing stability subrecipient, we might not get to that very specifically. We'll follow up offline just to make sure we get to enough of the general questions for everyone. I did want to go back over the early application deadline. We had a couple of questions on that. Meredith, are you able to go to either the NOFA timeline or where we talk about the early application deadline? I know we had gone through it a couple times. I just wanted to make sure that this is pretty clear. So all applications, like the final application deadline date is January 7th. And that everything has to be submitted and received in our system by 5 p.m., not 5:01 p.m. So we'll make the cutoff exactly 5 p.m. On that day. Regarding the early application notification, this is just an email to us a few weeks in advance of the application deadline. So we get an understanding of possibly the volume, how many funds are being received. So this would just be an email to us indicating your entity's, desire to apply, an estimated amount that you're going to apply for. We will not hold you to that amount. If you want to, if you continue going through and honing your application, you can certainly change the information that you put in there. This is just for us to get a good idea. And as Meredith mentioned, if you do submit that email to us by December 16th, your organization would receive 10 extra points in the scoring. So it really is a good idea for us planning wise, and then for your organization as well to help your scoring. Someone asked if, just while I'm still on this topic, if you don't do that early application notification, you're still eligible. You don't have to do it. We would still accept your full application no later than January 7th at 5 p.m. And you can submit your full application now. You don't have to wait until the early application notification. The application portal is open. So you can submit now, but we will not begin scoring until after all the applications are due. So, you certainly can, but you might want to wait just to, double check. It is possible that we may issue, a correction on the NOFA that's posted. We had just issued a correction yesterday. So that is possible, but I just wanted to address that before we got into some of the other questions. All right, so let's go back and start from the top. And Alex and Frank, please feel free to jump in here at any point. So we answered the first question, will the training be recorded? Yes, it will. All materials are there. I just peeked on the website. The slides are there, and a list of questions that have been provided in this webinar will be provided as well. I know it's sometimes difficult to go back and look at your answer when there's not a recording or when there's not a transcript and to find it in there. So we'll put this in there as well. Alex, I'm going to hand the next one over to you. Can funds be used to pay for GED? I see that you've got a response in there, so could you please share that with the group?
Yeah, sure. As of right now, the cost of a GED is not an eligible expense for this program because the program covers general employment training. You can look at our program guidelines to see what kind of education assistance is coverable. So this is something that we could revisit internally, but as of right now, GED expenses are not an eligible expense.
Okay, thanks for that, Alex. Okay. Next, going right down the line, excellent questions. So we had a lot of questions about who is eligible to apply for this program. Again, like I said at the beginning, it is not for homeowners. This is not for rental assistance. This is not for landlords. This is for eligible organizations that we have listed in the NOFA and that are eligible under the Treasury regulations. So this would be cities, counties, councils of governments, public housing authorities, private nonprofit organizations, and other eligible organizations per the Treasury regulations. Someone had asked if local mental health authorities are eligible. And I believe local mental health authority fits either into the Council of Government category or into the private nonprofit organization category. I am aware of, I think, one LMHA in Texas that is a for-profit, so that specific LMHA would not be eligible. But if your organization fits into those other categories of city, county, COG, PHA, private nonprofit, and other, others that might fit in, within those categories are eligible. So that was a really good question about local mental health authorities. Okay, so let's see. All right, I'm just clicking down through some of these questions. We've answered them in different ways. Okay. The next question is about the length of the award. So current ERA1 subrecipients, those contracts are for 12 months. And if you are an existing ERA1 subrecipient, you know the term of your contract. For this notice of funding availability, the amount or the total time for these contracts is going to be 2 years, so 24 months. And then, I did just want to mention again, Meredith, could you bring up that timeline slide? We got some questions on this as well about, the one where it shows ERA1 and ERA2. Yeah, there we go, that one. Okay, so if you have a current contract, your current contract is 12 months. If you're awarded an ERA2 housing stability contract, that will go for 24 months. And as Meredith mentioned, that's because our ERA1 funds expire in September of 2022. So if we don't fully use them as a state, we cannot access them anymore. They disappear, they go back. And I really do not want to let that happen. I want to make sure that we fully expend these funds and we use them, in the best way possible for housing stability services. So Alex or Frank or Meredith, do you guys have anything else to add on that kind of important topic about the length of contracts for ERA1 plus ERA2? I'm just scanning through some of the questions. Go ahead.
I have nothing else to add, Kate.
Okay, good. Someone asked, how do we know if you're an ERA1 subrecipient? If you're an ERA1 subrecipient with TDHCA funding, you've probably had 1,000 emails from myself or Frank or Alex or Meredith. But that specific person that asked if they are a subrecipient, I'll check just to see if you are, but there are currently 27 subrecipient organizations that have received ERA1 funding. So if you haven't heard from us before, you are probably not a funded organization, but we'll double check for you on that. Okay. Let's see. Okay, someone asked if there is a match requirement. There's no match requirement in this NOFA. You do not have to put that information in your application. It's not part of this. Okay. Next is the clarification on the scoring that we had just changed. Alex, I'm gonna put this to you because you had provided some responses in the questions chat. The question is, could you clarify the 75% expended by the application deadline of January 7th? This has just been corrected in the NOFA. So Meredith, could you bring up, please, that slide where I think it's got the scoring for section 3B. And then Alex, could you address kind of the change in what that means?
Yes, of course. So I think the important thing is what the NOFA previously said prior to being the recent amendment. And that's what the NOFA used to say, that ERA1 HSS subrecipients had to expend at least 25% of their total award by the end of the first quarter, right? That has been amended to reflect the fact that each ERA1 subrecipient has different contract benchmarks for their first quarter. So not all organizations, because they vary in their activities, plan to spend at least 25% of the total award by the first quarter. So as a result, we have amended that requirement so that you now have to meet at least 75% of what you have set as your expenditure benchmark in your contract. So if you are curious as to what that benchmark is, it's in your contract under your performance benchmark section. And as long as you spend 75% of whatever your first expenditure requirement is, you are eligible to receive these points. Another important thing to remember is if we move on to ERA2, the performance benchmarks, as Meredith mentioned, will work differently, and this is mentioned in the NOFA, that all of the ERA2 eventual subrecipients will have the same performance benchmarks. So they won't be different by subrecipient. So that's what I have there.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Okay, we'll probably get some more questions coming in about that, so we will go back to that if necessary, if it's still not clear to some folks. The next question I have is, what if you have different activities for ERA1 and ERA2? Do you have to fully expend ERA1 funds before using ERA2? This is a good question. Even if you're proposing different activities than what exists in your current contract, this requirement that you expend ERA1 before you can even tap into your ERA2 funds, it still stands, regardless of proposing different activities. We really need, as a state, to ensure that we use every last penny of these ERA1 funds before we let you get into your ERA2 contract, should your organization be awarded. That way we won't have overlapping contracts, overlapping different activities for different contracts. I know that there are some very high capacity organizations that can certainly handle this, but this is the decision that we've made to make sure that ERA1 is fully expended before we tap into ERA2. Let's see, the next question is, if we have ERA1 funds as a city, I guess if you're a city or local municipality that has received ERA1 funds directly from the Treasury and not from TDHCA, the question is, does that count for the 40 bonus points? And the answer is no. We'll go back and make sure that this is clear. But if you have received ERA1 housing stability funds from the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, and you were an existing TDHCA ERA1 housing stability subrecipient, then you would be eligible for those extra points. But if you're running your own ERA1 program at the city and have used that for stability funds as well, that's awesome. You're certainly eligible to apply, but you would not be eligible for those 40 bonus points. Okay. All right, let me scroll down through the questions. Guys, feel free to please. Go ahead, Alex.
So one of the questions that keeps popping up is regarding rent and utility assistance. And there's been a few different variations of this question that has come through. And the most general question is, can these funds be used for rent and utility assistance? The answer to that question is no. Rent and utility assistance in general is not an eligible expense under the Housing Stability Services Program. What are eligible expenses, of course, are things like rent deposits, application fees, landlord incentives, pet deposits, and then short-term hotel motel stays. But those general rent and utility assistance is not an eligible expense. And if you have more questions about what is eligible, you can look at the program guidance on our website. There was another question kind of similar to that related to eviction diversion services. The eviction diversion services do not include the payment of rent. It's generally legal services in order to help a client who may be facing eviction. You can look also on our program guidelines about the direct stipulations regarding eviction diversion services for the program, but that does not involve direct rent payments or the payment of rent arrears in order to prevent eviction. So no general rent or utility assistance is eligible under this program.
Yeah, that's an important clarification. Thank you, Alex. Related to that, there was a question about the Texas Rent Relief Program. Someone had asked if eligibility for housing stability households would be determined based on their TRR, their Texas Rent Relief eligibility, or if it would be determined through the Texas Rent Relief program. And the answer is no. These programs and the eligibility are very separate, even though we're kind of funded under the same umbrella of emergency rent assistance funding. Eligible households for your housing stability services program would not have to go through the eligibility and application for the Texas Rent Relief Program. So they're very separate. Let's see, Alex, there is a question in here about Visa gift cards for food assistance. Could you just briefly touch on the eligibility for gift cards? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but I know you can handle it.
Yeah, of course. This is a little bit of a tricky question. So if I miss anything, I'm sure Kate will fill in after I finish. But the regulations regarding gift cards as an eligible expense is all governed by federal administrative code and 2 CFR. And it basically requires that if you provide gift card assistance to a client, you need to track receipts to ensure that that gift card was only spent on eligible items. Those eligible items are, of course, listed in our program guidance, and they include things like, basic hygiene, basic clothing expenses, things like that, or groceries, for instance. But there needs to be a way to track those expenses only and you're only eligible for reimbursement for the expenses that are spent on the gift card that are eligible expenses, right? So those receipts need to go in a client file. They need to be kept and monitored. There's a whole bunch of other requirements with gift cards. For instance, if you have some sort of gift card fee, if you're doing a Visa gift card, that would have to be an administrative expense, not a program expense. There are sorts of requirements with gift cards, and if you have specific questions about this, you can ask us, but you can give gift cards without asking for receipts in return if they are for an organization that only offers eligible services, right? So if it's a store that only offers basic clothing or basic hygiene, or it's a place that only offers food, or then that might be an eligible expense. But once again, be careful with that, because for instance, large grocery stores are not an exception to that. So HEB gift cards, you cannot use without tracking receipts, because things can be purchased at HEB besides food. So the regulations with gift cards get very tricky. We encourage that if you are looking to use gift cards, that you reach out to us beforehand to make sure that you're compliant with federal administrative code. And you also might want to check with your own counsel, your own accountants, related to what you can and cannot do with gift cards. So the short answer to that is, if the gift cards are used to pay for an eligible expense, they are eligible, but you have to make sure you're compliant with federal codes and standards. Those are not codes and standards that we're setting, that's the federal government. So once again, it's tricky. If you have further questions, please email us.
Great. Thanks, Alex. The next question is about the audit certification form. Yeah, as noted for the required documents that you have to submit that are listed on the website and that would be uploaded in the application portal, an audit certification is part of those requirements. And the question is, what fiscal year end do we use? You would use your most recently completed fiscal year end. So again, the audit certification is one of the required forms that you have to submit along with your budget template, previous participation form, and then that audit certification requirement. So yeah, your most recent fiscal year end. That answers that question. Okay, I'm going to scan through these questions. Alex, Frank, or Meredith, please feel free to jump in if you see one that you would like to answer. If not, we'll just keep going right down the list. For folks that are still online, I see there's some folks that asked a question and then left the webinar. We'll follow up with them directly. Someone asked if a list of successful applicants will be published. Yes. Meredith, if we could go back to the overall timeline at the very beginning. Yeah, here we go. So award announcements, after we've received all the applications, done all of the scoring, award amount announcements will be made in March of 2022. That'll go to our March board meeting, and the TDHCA governing board will approve the award recommendations that staff has made based on the applications submitted. So in the board book that is public information, it's posted on the board section of our website, we'll list staff's recommendation for all of the awarded organizations. There'll be a little summary in there about the application process, how many applications we received, the review process, and then the final award amounts. So the organizations and then the amount that they are being awarded. That may be conditional award based on, if they clear our previous participation review. And then the contracts would start on April 1st of 2022. So I hope that answers the question about, applications being successful applications being published. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to keep going down the list. Okay, here's a good question. This is about landlord incentives. And guys, feel free to chime in here as well, because this topic has generated a lot of questions for us as well, just on the program level. So the question is, regarding landlord incentives, would it include high-risk fees or admin fees charged by apartment complexes? Those types of fees that would not be listed in other areas like the application or deposit fees. This is a really good question. Alex or guys, do you have any insight onto this? No? Okay, I'll handle it.
Could you actually repeat your question? I was answering another question in the chat.
Sure. Yeah, so for the landlord incentives, the question is, you know, if right now we're saying that application fees are eligible as an application fee expense. And the person asking the question wants a little clarification about those fees. So if there's high risk fees or other administrative fees charged by the apartment complex, are they considered landlord incentives or are they considered deposit or application fees? I think it kind of depends on the circumstance. I think application fees, the way it's written in our eligible activities, would cover some of those things. If it's a regular fee that every tenant is charged or every applicant is charged to obtain housing, that would be in your fee category. But if it's something special that doesn't apply to all tenants or all applicants, if this is really something needed to assist the housing stability of a household, with a high risk payment or additional fee, that would go in your landlord bucket. But that's something you could certainly put in your proposed budget, and then when we come down to turning that budget into if your organization is awarded what would go into your contract, we can really make sure we understand the differences of what fees go in what bucket. But go ahead and put it in your proposed budget, and then just so you've got those line items identified and how you would pay for each one of those. If you are going to do landlord incentives, make sure you submit a landlord incentive policy as well, because those types of payments are not specifically on leases, but we do need some verifiable documentation that those fees are being expended in the correct way. Okay. So let's see, another question is, so 1 month's rent. So the limits of rent payments and landlord incentive payments for 1 month. And Alex, I'm gonna call on you again, because we just kind of talked about this offline a little bit earlier about deposits, 1 month's rent for using. Sorry, I'm stumbling over myself. So with deposit assistance and landlord incentives, those are capped at 1 month of assistance, unless for the deposit, your organization can prove that there is, it's customary in the local market to have a higher level. You would put that in your application and say, based on what is acceptable and customary in our local housing market, these are the actual deposit fees that would be accepted. We have asked Treasury if we could apply that same flexibility on increasing the 1 month's cap of rent for a deposit to the landlord incentive. Right now that is also capped at 1 month. We have not heard back, so that remains until we hear back differently, and we would update our guidelines and put that information out. Let's see. Maybe Alex or Frank or Meredith, you guys want to take another question? I feel like I'm talking a lot and I might be talking myself in circles. I don't want to accidentally confuse our attendees today. Maybe some questions on administrative costs. Could someone give an overview of, what we would generally categorize as administrative versus eligible program cost?
Sure, I can jump in. So for ERA2, administrative costs are going to be 10%, and ERA1, of course, they were 7%. And so what those costs would entail would be anything that is necessary for the specific program, but maybe isn't necessarily going to directly impact the client. So, for example, if you had someone who helped with your reporting but did not interact with the client, that person would be an administrative cost. And I don't know if there are any other examples you guys would like to give, but.
No, I think that's good. I would just refer, if you, in developing your applications, you have questions about what is, eligible in administrative versus program buckets, please refer to our program guidelines that have recently been posted on the website. That kind of gives a good little chart of generally what is eligible and what goes in which bucket. Okay. We have a question from an organization that is a community council that serves 31 counties. They have a central office responsible for allocations to their recipient counties. And the question is, do we only submit one grant application? Yes, please do not send us 31 applications. That you certainly could, but those 31 applications would be then turned into 31 unique contracts if they were awarded. So if you are this community council that serves 31 counties, you are eligible as one of the eligible organizations to apply for this notice of funding availability. And you would just write in your grant application how you would administer the funds through your 31 county offices. So you would be kind of the main subrecipient. All of the reporting would come up through you, but you would then, through the regular centralized way that your office currently runs, then explain to us how you would also administer these funds through those 31 counties. And that's fantastic that you've got such a large service area in rural areas that certainly need housing stability assistance. We've got some questions on, there's a lot of questions on eligible activities. And then I think, I'm just scanning through these questions.
Yeah, here's a good question. I don't think we're going to be able to answer every single question about eligible activities that we've received. I do encourage everyone to go to our website and look at the program guidelines about eligible activities. But here's one that we've had a conversation with existing ERA1 HSS subrecipients, and that's specifically related to staff. And it's basically what type of staff is eligible for these program funds. And the general answer at the most basic level is that staff that provides direct services to clients. So the clearest example is a caseworker, housing navigator, someone who provides legal services or mental health services directly to clients would count as their salary would count as a program expense. It's a program eligible expense. However, if there is staff that works on the program that is not directly serving clients, then they're going to be an administrative expense. So any sort of management staff, accountants, working in procurement, something like that is an administrative expense, and that will have to come from your 10% administrative budget. So that's the most general answer that I have for that question.
Thanks, Alex. I want to make sure that we're addressing questions, equally from our current ERA1 subrecipients, and then also new organizations that are looking to apply for these funds. So if you don't have a current ERA1 contract, but you do, want to apply for these funds, we absolutely encourage you to do that. You would have to start spending your funds immediately. So if you do not have a current ERA1 contract, but you were awarded ERA2 funds for housing stability, your contract would start on April 1st, and we would expect you start, expending your funds immediately to meet your benchmarks of 25% expended within the first 6 months. So, also, answering the question back for the ERA1 subrecipients, if you're not allowed to start spending your ERA2 awarded funds because you have an ERA1 contract, how would that affect your benchmarks? Because we are setting those benchmarks, very clearly. That's something that we would just adjust as we go on a case-by-case basis. It's just, it is a benchmark. It's not if you absolutely do not meet it, we 100% take away your funds. This is done on a case-by-case basis. No one expects to meet, a benchmark exactly on the, down to the, penny every quarter. That would be amazing, but it's just not realistic. So again, it would be on a case-by-case basis. But if you have not received ERA1 funds, and frankly are a little bit worried about that 40% boost or 40-point boost that current subrecipients may get if they are in good standing with their current contract, I would absolutely please encourage you to apply. There's $84 million available under this NOFA. And I do think there is great need across the state. So if you are a current subrecipient, absolutely, we encourage you to apply. If you are a new, non-subrecipient, but think that your organization could provide, a really strong housing stability services program, to the eligible households in your service area, please do apply as well. I would encourage folks not to see that 40% difference in the scoring as a deterrent. There's a large pot of funding that we really want to see expended in the best way possible to help, the households that really need this funding tremendously. So I hope that alleviates any concern about, our going back and forth on that 40-point boost. It's 40 points out of 200. And you have to get a threshold of 60 points to be eligible, to score for an eligible application. So I certainly see a lot of very savvy questions coming in. I'm fairly certain that we'll get a lot of great applications. So, please do apply. Okay, yeah, there we go. Oh, it's 65 points. Thank you, Meredith, for bringing that up. So out of a score of 200, it's only 40 reserved for ERA1 subrecipients, but you must get 65 points. So, going through your application, looking at the scoring criteria, if you're writing a really strong application and you've got all of the supporting documentation, I expect to see a lot of really competitive, strong applications in this round. Someone's asking when this webinar will be available to view online. As soon as possible. It usually takes a day for the video to process and for our webmaster to put it up. Let's see. Guys, feel free to jump in for questions. I'm kind of losing my place here, but I do want to make sure that we at least address, questions that are really useful for the group that are not kind of real program specific or are not rent relief specific.
Here's one. Are any pre-award expenditures deemed eligible for reimbursements? Things such as a grant writing consultant. And the answer to this question is that no pre-award expenditures are eligible for reimbursement. So only expenditures post-award that are used in order to get the program up and running and to serve clients.
Some acronyms in here. If you've submitted a question with an acronym from another program, I'll follow up with you directly. Let's see. Someone asked about furniture. Furniture is currently not an eligible expense. It's not for ERA1. It is not planned for ERA2. We have asked Treasury to reconsider that and to weigh in on that. We certainly think it would. We know that it would be a helpful service to eligible households, but right now, until we hear back from that question on that guidance, furnishings are not an allowable expense.
Okay, there's a couple questions about larger deposits. And the answer is we can provide larger deposits. You have to show proof that the market and the area is warranting that. But Alex, can you answer if it's 3 times or is there a certain amount? Is there a maximum?
So I'll cover 2 general questions here. Kate kind of covered this earlier, but the Treasury allows us to approve up to 2 months of security deposits. The limit is 1, but we can approve up to 2 if there's sufficient proof that that is customary in the local housing rental market. So the subrecipient, the onus is on them to prove to us sufficiently that that 2 months security deposit is customary and is customary for the eligible populations they serve, right? So it wouldn't be sufficient to say that individuals above 80% AMI have to pay 2 months deposit, right? So they have to prove 4 eligible populations so that we have sufficient justification to Treasury to provide that service. Nothing above 2 months security deposit is eligible, right? You can't do 3, can't do 2.5. 2 is the maximum if there's sufficient proof. People are asking what is sufficient proof. That is up to how good you can justify it, right? This would be using data about the local housing market. This would be drawing in kind of data from your own internal workings. Like this is, how many of our clients we've served that the landlord needed a double security deposit, or this is the local COC. They say that this many people need double security deposits, right? So it's the data available, but it will require data. It requires a little bit of work for justification. It's not enough to simply say, well, this is an expensive housing market. Allow us to do this, right? It requires a report be submitted to us. So that's kind of where the justification is. I'm going to segue this into a second question, but there's been a lot of questions regarding security deposits versus landlord incentives, right? Security deposits versus landlord incentives. Security deposits in the Treasury guidance, if, of course, the tenant is eligible to receive their full security deposit, should be returned to the tenant, provided that that tenant has lived in that unit for at least 4 months. right? This is in our program guidelines. If it's not able to be returned to the tenant, then it should be returned to the subrecipient, right? And then spent again for the HSS program, right? So that stays within the program. On the other end, a landlord incentive is a payment that goes directly to the landlord in order to house a hard-to-house population. And I believe the list of these hard-to-house populations are in our guidance. If they're not, they are in the Treasury FAQs on their website. So these are, persons with records, persons with poor credit, persons without rental history due to homelessness, and so forth, right? And that can be up to 1 month. The same with security deposits, it requires at least a 6 months lease, and your organization needs to have a policy for how to operate these landlord incentives. So we're not going to approve anyone to be giving landlords money to help house hard-to-house populations unless they have a policy for the rules and requirements that that landlord, has to abide by, right? Which includes things like, limitations on how they can evict the tenant, right? The difference is the security deposit, of course, is returned. The landlord incentive is a one-time payment to the landlord. We are including risk fees generally as a landlord incentive. However, risk fees do not necessarily need a full landlord incentive policy in order to pay for them if they are something that the landlord or management company kind of universally adds on to applications where there's poor credit history or so forth, right? So if it's a standard fee that they use. However, if there's any sort of conversation between the landlord and the subrecipient, such as the landlord requests extra money or the subrecipient says, hey, we can pay you money if you agree to house this household, then that's a full landlord incentive. That policy needs to be in there, and it needs to be a well-written policy. So lots of distinctions between security deposits, landlord incentives, and how they differ. If you have more questions about that, we encourage you to email us. Oh, and one last thing, someone asked, can you pay a security deposit and a landlord incentive? And the answer to that question is yes. It still goes by the same limitations. 1 month is the limit for security deposits unless approved to give out 2 month security deposits. And the landlord incentive is always limited by 1 month. So good question.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alex. And just, as you're developing your applications, please just make sure that if you're requesting these funds in your budget template, that is, it's accurately reflected on how you were specifically intending to use those funds, with each of those buckets within your, your service area with your eligible population. So these are excellent questions. Just, please make sure that it's very clear for us to understand when we read your application how you are intending to use, security deposits, landlord incentives, and then several other services for housing stability services in your application. There's a couple of questions about subcontractors and sub awards. Alex, did you?
Can I actually steal away for 1 second, Kate, before we leave security deposits question?
Yeah, please.
Just because it's on the same subject. And very good question. This question is for larger deposits that cannot be covered. Could we use other funding sources to cover the difference? The answer to this question is yes. So if you have other funding available that you can use to cover a larger deposit, then you are welcome to use that and use ours for the limit of 1 month. You will have to document this, right? So you'll have to have that 6 month lease in the client file. and you will have to have some sort of billing statement that says, hey, we are billing just 1 month of this to the HSS program, and the rest we are covering ourselves, right? And then, of course, when you submit for reimbursement, you can only include that 1 month that is eligible to be reimbursed in your total. So good question. You can use your other funds to cover the remaining. You just have to keep track of it, because if, you know, when we do compliance monitoring, if a compliance monitor opens the client file and sees that you expended for 2 months, but you have no proof that our funds were only used for 1 month, then that could potentially be a finding. So just something to keep track of.
Great, thanks, Alex. That's really helpful. I want to address a couple of questions about subcontractors or sub-awards. Those are both allowable. The program guidelines and the NOFA both kind of speak to this. If you're using a subcontractor, that typically would come out of your administrative funds. If you are sub-awarding these funds, that is also allowable. But a lot of the, you know, the sections that would go in your contract as a recipient of these funds from TDHCA, you would then be responsible for monitoring with your sub-awarded entities. So yes, those activities are both allowable. You know, if that is something that you're planning to do, please give us lots of detail in your application on how you plan to administer those funds and oversee those funds and make sure that you know, that they're used in a compliant way. And the other kind of eligibility question that I had was regarding non-entitlement communities and participating jurisdictions. You don't have to be in or out of either one of those geographic areas. This is statewide funding, so you don't have to be either within or without a PJ or a non-entitlement community to receive these funds or to apply for these funds. Anywhere you're located in the state, you can certainly apply for these funds, and we encourage you to do that. You would just have to be one of the eligible organizations that we had covered earlier in the workshop. Okay, I think we're getting kind of towards the bottom. We've had a lot of really excellent questions. So yes, the guidelines that are posted apply to both ERA1 and ERA2. There's some very slight differences between the Treasury regulations for ERA1 and ERA2. It's basically, you know, you can be eligible for a client, a household could be eligible for ERA1 funds. You know, if I'm going to make sure I say this right, Alex, please jump in, or, you know, Frank and Meredith, please jump in as well. There is not a lot of difference between the Treasury's regulation for ERA1 and ERA2. You know, the eligibility for households, they would have to meet 80% AMI. They would have to have been, you know, financially impacted either directly or indirectly by the pandemic. So I think, you know, in this world, certainly you could make a very good case for, you know, most eligible clients being indirectly affected by the pandemic. In the Treasury regulations for ERA1, they say it specifically, you know, due to COVID-19, directly or indirectly, but now it's just, you know, the kind of the ripple effect of the pandemic. Has the household been financially impacted, or are they now unstably housed because of the, you know, current conditions? Alex or Frank or Meredith, did you have anything else to add to that? No, perfectly clear, huh? Okay. Yes, 10 pages double spaced does not allow for a lot of detail, as I keep requesting. Can that be changed at all? No. I'm sure, you know, you could tell us, you know, lots and lots about your amazing organization, but I do expect a lot of applications, and we are going to keep it to that, you know, very succinct and direct application narrative. So yeah, it'll be a balance. Yes, I am saying lots of detail, but enough detail to prove to us, in your application, what you intend to use these funds for. And you can certainly attach, your landlord incentive policy, but there's not going to be any change on the limit of narrative that we'll accept. I'd also say in the budget template, that is, it is a template. It's meant to be, broad enough that you could, really drill down into several, several line items. Yeah, so, use that as a template. There's instructions in there, but it is not supposed to be overly prescriptive from our side, so you can really, hone it to what's best for your organization. Someone asked if the response to these questions will be posted. Yes, they will be posted. Like I said before, I recognize that it's difficult to go back and review questions when it's in a recording format, and we're not doing a transcript of this webinar. So yeah, we'll just post all the questions. We'll probably categorize them a little bit, but they'll all be publicly available if they apply specifically to the NOFA. We've had a couple of questions from some folks that are renters or landlords and are not, those questions would not be posted. They will be addressed directly with the attendee here. Someone asked if if more than one entity applies within a geographic region, would they both be considered? Yes. If you're, in one of the larger cities, or even anywhere in the state, if we expect to receive multiple applications from within the same geographic region, each application will be considered just based on the scoring criteria, not who else you're competing with within your region. Okay. Could you guys scan through the questions and make sure that we're getting the ones that will be really useful for the group and things that we haven't addressed yet?
I'm scanning, Kate.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked, when do you have to turn in the application? For this, applications are due January 7th at 5 p.m. Like Meredith said, all applications have to go, they have to be submitted through the portal by 5 p.m. on January the 7th. Can more than one program or department within an organization also apply for these funds? We're going to accept one application per organization. So if you are considering submitting an application, I would say coordinate with the other programs or departments within your organization, and submit a combined complete application. Someone keeps referring back to the rent relief portions of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program from the Treasury guidance. Again, housing stability services through the emergency rent assistance programs, up to 10% of those funds that have been distributed to all states can be used for housing stability. So Texas has decided to go ahead and do that and carve out up to 10% of our funds for housing stability services. So that kind of uncouples it from the rent relief and the rent payments and the utility payments section of the Treasury guidelines. So, please know that for these applications, rent assistance is not an allowable expense. Utility assistance is not an allowable expense. There are other programs for that. I recognize that, as I say this, TDHCA has closed our application portal. But if in your area there are current rent relief or emergency rent assistance relief programs available, you could suggest that you would help provide assistance in tenants applying for or applicants applying for those rent assistance programs. If in your case management proposal you also wanted to provide housing navigation services, that would certainly be allowable, but this is not the Texas Rent Relief Program. Let's see. Someone asked what information is to be submitted with the early application notification. Oh, good. And Meredith, thank you. Just type that in. So the name of the organization and the amount of funds you're going to request. That's the minimum amount of information you need. Again, just to get an idea. Thanks. And Meredith has a slide up here. You would submit it by December the 16th by 5 p.m. to that email here. Please don't email us directly. If you do, and it's NOFA submission, if you're submitting documents to us, we will disregard that. Please put everything into the HSS website. We all monitor it, so we'll make sure that responses are logged and they're in our system.
So I have a question, Kate, that I want to make sure we get to. And I apologize for the person who asked it because it was a while ago and we're just now circling around to it. But this is one that I might send to you first, Kate, and then we'll see if I have anything to add. But this is related to scoring criteria 2A on the NOFA, which is, let's see here. Oh yeah, cool. Do you have it? There we go. If the applicant provides shelter or temporary or permanent housing in addition to services, does the applicant require those sheltered/housed to participate in services and/or case management? And the question was related to what is sufficient in order for what's the word I'm looking for? Applicant, excuse me, to meet this criteria. So what is sufficient to meet this criteria?
Okay.
Did you have anything in particular, Kate, or?
Well, I think sufficient to meet the criteria would be, just the first two bullets that, meeting that criteria for those 25 points. If your organization is proposing with these funds to provide shelter or housing, in addition to services, so you're going to provide services and housing, and if you're requiring that, let's see. Yeah, so if you require that the housed, the sheltered clients participate in your services or case management, then you would receive the 25 points. Or if you only offer services and case management and you're not offering shelter or housing, you would also receive 25 points. If you're not proposing to offer any services or case management, and if you are just providing housing, you would not receive points under this scoring criteria. It does not mean that you would be deemed ineligible. It just means that you would not specifically receive the points under this criteria. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that answers it. And I actually do want to add, because you sparked my thoughts on this, Kate, that I think the key here is that services and/or case management element. So it's important to remember, especially for our ERA1 subrecipients, is that there's things that are considered, general HSS services, and there's things that are considered direct household payments. So those direct household payments are those things like hotel, security deposit, and the pet deposits, things like that. So to meet this requirement, it's not sufficient just to perform intake, so take their information down and then provide a security deposit. You would actually have to set the client up with a case manager and have the case manager speak to them about their need for the security deposit and see if there's any other services or assistance that they can provide, right? So it is a merging of sort of both those direct household payment categories, as well as the shelter services, with the more direct services that are provided by HSS funds. So case management, housing navigators, mental health services. An easy way to be sufficient for this requirement is you have someone sit down with the household and provide a service for them in addition to the security deposit or just providing shelter or so forth.
Great, yeah, thank you so much for that. And I know this is, it might be a little bit different than, some of the other programs, request their proposed activities or their scoring. And we recognize that, these are treasury funds. This is a little bit unique, but that's, I don't know, kind of the fun thing about this program is it's, the eligible activities can be, pretty broad, within the housing stability services focus. So your activities, that you're proposing would have to be focused, directly on your clients. If something that you're proposing does assist a household in becoming stably housed, then that is an eligible expense. So yeah, Alex, thank you for the detail on that question. Let's see. Just scanning through here. I see two questions here from what I think might be a VAWA or a domestic violence shelter or domestic violence assistance provider. Would the hotline counseling be eligible? So if you've got people that call your domestic violence hotline in need of shelter and you are using that, that as a funnel for housing stability services, yes, that would be an eligible expense for your program as that specific domestic violence provider that you are providing that counseling service. Let's see. Let's see, just broadly, some folks are having some questions about where the application portal is, where the materials are. So on the Housing Stability Services webpage on TDHCA, there is a link directly to the application portal, but please only apply if you are an eligible, if you can determine that you are an eligible organization under this NOFA. Thank you all for attending and bearing with us as we go through. We've received lots of spectacular questions, so I'm just going to keep scanning through and see if we can get these all answered. Staff, please feel free to jump in as well. Okay, it appears that maybe when I was talking about one application per organization conflicted with what I had said earlier about, I think it was a community action agency perhaps that serves 31 counties. That one organization, that one community organization that serves 31 counties should submit one application. I apologize if that was unclear. We do not want 31 separate applications for 31 separate counties that are covered by one organization serving those 31 counties. So one application per organization, please. I apologize if that was not clear. There is no form for early submission. Someone asks, where do you find that form? You just send an email to the email address that we had in the previous slides. Meredith, if you could bring up the early application information slide. You just send us the information of who your organization is and what funds you are intending to apply for. There we go. So there's no special application form, there's no portal, just send us an email to this email address for the early application notification. Submitting this does not mean you've fully submitted an application. Okay. A question just came in that says, if we are only able to assist families being affected by the pandemic with rental application, referral deposits, utility deposits, and not rental assistance, how will a family maintain housing stability? That's a good question. There are several other eligible activities that you could propose, and those activities are listed both in the NOFA and both in the program guidelines. This is case management, this is shelter services, several other types of assistance that you could provide that are not just specific to rent deposits, utility deposits, without being able to provide rent and assistance. Does anyone else want to add into that?
I do want to say, and this isn't necessarily an answer to the question, but that from my experience, security deposit assistance and landlord incentive payments are a very big need, and they're a need that is generally not as well covered by other state and federal programs. So, there's a lot of households that, may be able to afford rent, but they can't afford the upfront cost of a security deposit, or they may be able to afford their rent, but they can't find anyone to house them because, they have a poor credit history, right? So this program would allow you to do things like pay for that security deposit, or provide that landlord incentive payment. And also, you can check our program guidelines, but Meredith actually covered it at the very end of the webinar, but it can, pay for credit repair services for inaccuracies on a credit report. So there's a lot of need there that can still be covered by the program that isn't just, rent or utility payments. And then, of course, as Kate said, a myriad of other services, shelter services, mental health counseling, all listed in our program guidance.
Good, thank you for that. So another question, can ERA2 funding be used in conjunction with other funding sources? Certainly. We would not expect that, as an organization, you're serving certain households with just one specific source of funding. So yes, you can. Just please make sure that, if your organization is awarded, you're using ERA2 housing stability services funding for eligible activities for that specific household. And if there's something that's not eligible, for example, furnishings, you could use a separate funding source to provide that household with, case management through the housing stability funds, and then, you've helped locate housing for them, you've got them securely housed. You could use a different source of funds to provide other services, which would include furnishings. So, yeah, there's no limit on what other funds could be used to assist a household. Okay. Oh, good. Someone said that one of my responses was clear. That's good. Okay.
I do say we want to encourage people also to be creative in how they combine funds. There was one example of a subrecipient for ERA1 funds who couldn't provide furnishing expenses through the program, but the program does allow moving expenses, right? So they were able to gather furnishings from like community partners and from donations, and put it on a moving truck and help move this family to a new home. So things like that, are creative uses of the funds that you can use in conjunction with other funds.
Someone just asked about I think the funding source for ERA2, and if the funding for this is kind of contingent upon the reallocation of treasury from other municipalities if they haven't spent their ERA 1 or 2 funds. The funding for this program is completely separate from the rent relief programs. So even though those have closed, other municipalities are having, if they're having difficulty spending, Treasury might recapture that funding. That has nothing to do with this program. There is, $84 million has been programmed and released in this NOFA. So that amount of funding, it's not in jeopardy. It is by being recaptured or being shifted over to the Texas Rent Relief Program. The funds in this NOFA are specifically for housing stability services and not other reallocation from Treasury. So I hope that answers that question. There we go. Meredith, you're so good on the slides. Yes. So yeah, and I guess we'll repeat this as well. There's a pretty big range in the minimum or maximum amount that could be requested from your organization. And I recognize that this is pretty broad. So remember this, you would be applying for 2 years of funding, unless you are a current ERA1 subrecipient, knowing that you would have a little bit of lag in spending your first amount of funds before you could tap into your second amount of funds. We could certainly work on benchmarks. But yeah, so when you're planning your budget, when you're planning your application, really think about how much would be an adequate amount for your organization and within your service area and your eligible population. So from $100,000 over 2 years, all the way up to $12 million per organization per year, or for 2 years, sorry, 2 total years. So, again, we recognize this is a wide range because we want to make sure that, smaller, really specialized, focused organizations that, do not have a large service area or just do a really, one specific thing very well in the housing stability world, your organization is certainly eligible and would be ranked, as well with those larger organizations. Conversely, if you're a very large organization that operates, in a huge service area or in a large city that, is part of a continuum, perhaps, this is also, you could go up to that $12 million in 2 year maximum. It's a wide range, but it is intentional. So we can provide these funds to a wide variety of organizations. Okay, guys, can I get your help in scanning through and plucking out any unaddressed questions that we do want to share with the group here? And thank you everyone for sticking with us almost to the 2-hour mark. I know it's a big chunk of time to take out of your day. So, I really hope that this helps to inform some great applications. I think we've got everything. Alex, Frank, or Meredith, please let me know. We'll just give it one more moment, and then I think we might wrap up. Like I said at the beginning, this is all going to be posted. The recording will be posted. The list of questions and responses will be posted. The slides are already up there. Whoops. I see Meredith is trying to find something. There we go. Thank you, slide. This is us. These are our direct contact information, but please don't send us your applications to our emails. Please send it through the portal. I would hate for someone to submit a really awesome application and be ineligible because you sent it to the wrong spot. And please don't email us for confirmation. You will receive confirmation when you submit through the portal. That, you know, when you submit, it'll send you a copy of your responses, and you can save that page as your submission confirmation. We will not be responding to you know, confirmations of submission. All right, staff, last call for questions. Thank you everyone for joining us. I really appreciate this. I know, you know, there was a lot of great information, you know, really dense up front through the slides, and then we just kind of did scattershot questions, but I really hope everyone got their questions answered. Good luck to everyone submitting and writing their applications. And yeah, I think that'll be it. So it'll probably take, like I said, a day to get the reporting kind of processed and up through our webmaster, but that should be up hopefully tomorrow. And then, you know, questions as soon as we can get those written and vetted and posted. So thank you all so much. Alex, Meredith, and Frank, thank you guys for hanging in there. Yeah, if there are additional questions, you can send them to hss@tdhca.state.tx.us.
And please try to send your questions in batches. So, you know, assemble all the questions your organization might have, and send them all at once rather than sending them individually. It just it makes things easier for us. It makes things easier for you because we're, you know, more easily able to respond quickly. So try to do that if at all possible.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're going to wrap up the webinar, and I appreciate your attendance and participation.